This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Africa. We're coming to live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers. Let's take a look at what happened on the markets today. Another devastating day for South Africa's markets. To give you an indication of the extent of the unrest in the country, more than 40 people have been killed. Earlier on today, there was a report of the instant loss of jobs for 600 employees after their factory was looted and then burned to the ground. That and more such incidents caused major banks and retailers to shut their doors in some areas, leading the losses on the JSE, where financials, which were down almost 4%. On the flip side, it was a good day for Egypt's EGX30. It closed almost 2% higher, bucking the global trend, which saw investors turn bearish on news of U.S. consumer prices rising by the most in 13 years. That was a quick look at the markets. Now let's take a look at more news making headlines. Ghana is set to launch its first digital currency. Nigeria grapples with scrapping electricity subsidies amounting to millions. And the European Commission temporarily halts plans for a new digital tax following intense pressure from the United States. Our starting point tonight is in Ghana, where the government is looking to pilot its central bank digital currency in 2 months' time. Also known as the e-cedi, the digital currency is expected to operate in a sandbox in the interim before being introduced to the general public as legal tender for financial transactions. First Deputy Governor of the Bank of Ghana, Dr. Maxwell Opoku-Afari, says the e-cedi is crucial, especially following COVID-19, as the outbreak has quickened the drive towards a cashless economy. Opoku-Afari says the pilot phase will be determined by how easily the public accepts the digital currency, as well as how soon the operational dynamics come to the fore. Well, joining us for analysis of this new development from Ghana is Dr. Adu Owusu-Sarkodie, who is an economics lecturer at the University of Ghana. Greeting to you, Doctor. Thank you so much for joining us. Adu, what are your thoughts on this move by Ghana's central bank to introduce a digital currency into the economy?
I think it's a good thing. Ghana is going digitization. We are trying to go cashless. If anything at all, the COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated that we need to go cashless and reduce the interpersonal relations. So it is a good thing that I think I should support. The mobile money transactions in Ghana has been successful. So with this coming on board to support it, I think it's a good initiative.
Adu, how do you anticipate the Ghanaian public might respond to digital currency?
There is some level of skepticism about this because Ghana's economy is largely informal, about 80% informal. The banking and insurance penetration in Ghana is less than 30%. And so we have a low financial literacy rate. And therefore, there is some amount of doubt about how the public is going to embrace this. But there is some amount of hope given the level of mobile money transactions that we have. More than 80% of Ghanaians undertake mobile money transactions. So given this, I think that, yes, we need to do more with the campaign, but I'm sure with time, Ghanaians will accept it.
Well, let's just speak a little bit about what Ghana's central bank deputy governor had said. He had mentioned that the potential for the digital currency to shape future monetary policy. How do you foresee that playing out?
Yes. Ghana now has a coordinated payment system, I think, which will ensure efficiency, will bring some transparency, will make sure that we reduce the wastages in the system and also plug all the loopholes in the black market. So this e-cash can also help, achieve this objective. So I think it's a good thing that we can do to help develop the economy.
Adu, on the global front, there have been reports of concern from some of the financial services industry, and I think they're concerned mostly about central banks having their own digital currencies. Do you think that the Central Bank of Ghana having a digital currency could disrupt the retail banking space in the country?
Yes, having a common currency has always been a very good objective, a very good thing to ensure intra-regional trade and inter-regional trade. We have seen the benefits of that from the European Union, and West Africa has been trying to introduce the ECO. The challenge here is to have the financial infrastructure and also have a common monetary system where we can coordinate all these activities. So with time, I'm sure we just have to put in the needed infrastructure, have the monetary system, common maybe central bank, coordinated activities, have common macroeconomic variables where we can coordinate all these things. So it is feasible. It might take some time, but I'm sure gradually we might go there. We might get there. That's why I'm happy about this piloting. So the piloting can bring out all these information that we need, whether it is good or bad, and the things that we need to know. And I'm sure that it's not all African countries that will integrate automatically or at the same time. We need to go the gradual way. So gradually we will get there.
Thank you so much, Dr. Adu Owusu Sarkodie, who is an economics lecturer at the University of Ghana. Well, meanwhile, the Central Bank of Egypt has launched a $6.3 billion mortgage finance initiative that serves low and middle income citizens. The action follows the decree by President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi to provide housing units for these categories with subsidized prices and long-term installment payments. Under the initiative, low and middle-income individuals will have access to secure loans from banks and mortgage companies with a decreased interest rate of 3% and a 30-year repayment period in order to purchase only fully finished housing units, according to Central Bank. The beneficiaries of this group have to pay a down payment that ranges between 15% and 20% minimum for the unit, with a price that ranges between $70,110 and $89,230. Well, meanwhile, the Egyptian Stock Exchange has begun trials of a new system that aims to improve accuracy, increase trading volumes, and boost foreign investment in Egyptian shares. The bourse is considering introducing an auction system to determine closing prices, a method used by some of the world's biggest exchanges. Reporting from Cairo, here's CGTN's Yasser Hakim.
The Egypt Stock Exchange current closing price system is based on the average share price throughout the trading session each day. However, the new mechanism under testing is the auction one that will determine the closing price for the day.
The new pricing system calculates the average price in the last half hour of trading. And not just the last half hour, but an average from every hour is considered during the day. The main element, though, is the average of the last hour to calculate a price that will open the market on the following day. The bourse is restructuring regulations to refresh the market and make it highly efficient and professional. This reduces manipulation and gives more accurate assessments of each share price.
Egypt's stock exchange has been suffering from lack of activity and low foreign investment volumes. Furthermore, a number of initial public offerings or IPOs that would have stimulated the market has been postponed from 2020 till the end of 2021. This is to shore them from the contraction in the market that has been caused by the coronavirus pandemic. Meanwhile, officials have finalized 3 simulation sessions to test the new mechanism, which they hope would improve investor confidence. But some traders are worried.
We are surprised about how quickly they want to apply the new pricing mechanism. We need more time to understand the system and study it thoroughly. The haste by officials has made us traders a bit worried. Overall, it is a good initiative for the market, but we need to understand it clearly, all the technical details, to be able to apply it in our work.
The EGX board says it's addressing all concerns and is planning to introduce the auction pricing system beginning in August. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
South Africa's commercial property sector remains in limbo as the country reports battling a third wave of COVID-19. Most corporate employees have been told to work from home since the first hard lockdown last year. A year later, many of these company buildings are still empty. CGTN Sumitra Naidu now tells us how this is impacting the economy.
Commercial property landlords lost over $2 billion in rental income during April and June 2020. Property owners agreed to write off the arrears as COVID relief.
And then some of the landlords were saying, well, I can't carry on paying the bond and the levies, I'm going to sell. So the cheaper ones seem to be doing a lot better, but we did do deferred payments with them.
But relief efforts are running thin on the ground. Most relief schemes have stopped.
We're basically relying on daily sales, which has put us in a terrible position to make rental. We are behind, but we have been in negotiations with our landlord all the time, just keeping up to date to say, okay, we can do this amount or that amount. And I think showing the willingness that we are able to try and pay something, she's been lenient with us. The sales has also dropped drastically, from what we used to do to what it is now. It's not good at all.
Employees of big companies, including the banks, were forced to work from home last year. A year later, they're being told to continue working from their homes until further notice. Some companies have even cancelled their leases, leaving scores of office blocks empty.
The Hyatt Hotel here in Rosebank has been closed since last year. This hotel caters for mostly business people coming into the CBD. There's still no clarity on whether this hotel will ever open again.
It's not an easy one because a lot of people are still struggling out there. I haven't had to go to the housing tribunal to report anybody because you kind of work with each other. People need accommodation. It hasn't been easy, and what can one say is that companies are just missing their employees. I actually don't know how it's going to improve, not with the lockdown and with so many people being affected by the COVID.
Credit data shows nearly 500 businesses have entered business rescue under the Companies Act since April last year. Heavily invested landlords will suffer the most, with little or no return on investments, and as the pandemic shows no signs of slowing. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Let's now take a look at your corporate headlines. Airtel Africa is considering seeking an extension or exemption from rules requiring it to cede a 30% stake in local subsidiaries to Kenyan investors by March 2024. Sidestepping the ownership rules could, however, force the multinational to pay $20 million for its expired license after the government demanded a settlement of the dues as a precondition to issue the exemption. The multinational says the new ownership rules published on April the 9th have an impact on two of its local subsidiaries, Airtel Networks Kenya Limited and Airtel Money Kenya Limited. The Bank of Kenya has completely taken over the regulation of mobile money services from the Uganda Communications Commission amidst customer anxiety. Customers have expressed fears that these new changes could affect safety of the cash, compromise the quality of services, and increase the cost of savings, deposits, withdrawal, and transfer of money. Figures from the Uganda Communication Commission shows that the total value of all mobile money transactions by all platforms hit US $8.2 billion in the fourth quarter of 2020. Volkswagen raised its long-term profitability target on Tuesday in a sign of the German automaker's growing confidence in managing the shift of electric and self-driving vehicles. Presenting its strategy until 2030, Europe's largest car maker also said that it expected half of its global vehicle sales to be battery-powered by that date. The targets came ahead of a huge package of climate policies the European Union plans to announce on Wednesday, possibly including a de facto ban of petrol-based vehicles from 2035. And finally, France's antitrust watchdog has fined Alphabet's Google $593 million for failing to comply fully with temporary orders it had given in a row with the country's new publishers. The U.S. search giant must now come up with proposals within the next 2 months on how it would compensate news agencies and other publishers for the use of their news. If it does not do that, the company would face additional fines of up to $1 million per day. Google says it's disappointed with the decision, but would comply. And those were your corporate headlines. Let's now take a short break and return. Here's what you can expect. Nigeria grapples with scrapping electricity subsidies amounting to millions of dollars. And ratings agency Fitch downgrades Tunisia's long-term debt to be negative.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra Nairobi. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
Welcome back. Well, Nigeria continues to struggle with subsidies which run into millions of dollars, and that's for its electricity. The International Monetary Fund has already raised the red flag over Nigeria's resumption of petrol subsidies, describing them as dangerous to the economy. Reporting from Nigeria's capital, Abuja, here's CGTN's Kelechi Emekelam.
Mohammed Ibrahim is a frozen foods trader and distributor in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. He sells a variety of proteins, including fish and chicken. His business is largely dependent on electricity supply to run effectively. That means he has to pay a high tariff, which has resulted in high operational costs.
The reason why prices are going up is not only electricity, and also the government did not take the right approach towards commercializing the electricity. Our market is paying heavily on electricity. That is why we are getting light. You know very well now the billing is no longer a single billing. Depends on the area you are and the numbers of hours you have light on daily basis.
Electricity consumers in Nigeria have been lamenting over tariff hikes since 2020. The increases are part of government's plan to gradually eliminate subsidy regime. Nigeria spends nearly $73 million monthly to subsidize electricity tariffs, far less than over $121 million spent in previous months.
To give you an idea of how huge it is, our oil revenues are less than 2 trillion naira in a year. So you can imagine we're spending a significant part of our oil revenues to subsidize the electricity market. Having said that, one of the reasons why you have a subsidy is also because the operators in the sector are not very efficient. So even though you are charged a tariff, the ability of the distribution companies to collect the revenues is quite low. We are averaging about 60% collection.
Since 1999, more than $16 billion has gone into boosting electricity supply in Nigeria, but distribution capacity still hovers around 4,700 megawatts, grossly insufficient for the nation's 200 million strong population. A recent report by the World Bank says Nigeria has the most number of people with no access to electricity, and this cost the nation economic annual losses of $29 billion.
10 to 12 million customers are the ones benefiting from this subsidy, not everybody. I see a lot of benefits when government decides to allow tariff reviews happen as and when it should happen. It would be painful at first for a lot of the consumers. There are a lot of people that can't pay their bills. It will be very painful. But if we continue in this trajectory, it will cause far more pain. So it's better that people realize what it is costing them, costing government, and at the end of the day, costing their pockets and their children, because these are debts that the government will pay at some point.
Nigeria's power sector continues to face a myriad of problems, including infrastructure constraints and tariff issues. Experts suggest improving baseline power supply with data-driven innovations and enhancing sector governance would help boost investors' confidence. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Ratings agency Fitch has downgraded Tunisia's long-term debt to B negative from B. According to the global rating firm, the outlook for Tunisia's economy remains negative. Experts say that the political instability and the impact of the COVID-19 crisis have worsened the situation. With the details, here's CGTN's Adnan Shuashi.
Fitch Ratings stressed that the downgrade to B- a negative outlook reflect heightened fiscal and external liquidity risks in the context of further delays in agreeing on a new program with the IMF, which is necessary for access to most official creditors' budget support.
We are aware of the difficult economic situation which the government is trying to improve. We have explained and defended Tunisia's position during our discussions with the IMF. Tunisia is starting structural economic reforms for the next few weeks, months and years. Convincing the IMF will open the doors for negotiations with other international creditors.
Fitch Ratings statement also explained that the fragmented political landscape and entrenched social opposition curtail the government's ability to enact strong fiscal consolidation measures, complicating efforts to secure the IMF program. Tunisia's government kicked off on May 18th negotiations with the IMF over getting a new loan.
We must be careful because the current political situation and turmoil have a negative impact on Tunisia's image abroad. We welcome any constructive criticism. The government urges all parties and national organizations to sit together and stand firm to get the necessary foreign funding and save our economy.
Economists warned against a new reform scenario. In this sense, Tunisia may ultimately be deemed to require a Paris Club treatment before being eligible for additional IMF funding.
This scenario would be catastrophic for the economy and the state. It means that Tunisia's credibility is at stake after 10 years of simultaneous crisis. The government needs to put in place the reform program as soon as possible. Otherwise, planned access to international markets, 2.2% of GDP in 2021 would be complicated by the absence of an IMF program.
Fitch forecasts Tunisia's economy to grow by 3.4% in 2021 after a contraction of 8.8% in 2020. In November 2020, Fitch Ratings revised Tunisia's outlook to negative from stable and affirmed the long-term foreign currency issuer default rating at B. According to the statement published by Fitch Ratings agency, the recent surge in COVID-19 infections and associated containment measures could slow down economic growth in the country. The finance minister noted that negotiations with the IMF and other international donors will not be easy. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
To Zimbabwe now, where Finance and Economic Development Minister Mthuli Ncube says the government is working on modalities that would allow pension funds to invest offshore. Pension funds have been lobbying for the permission to invest local pensioners' contributions outside of the country, especially following the re-emergence of inflationary pressures in 2018 and 2019. According to an earlier submission by the industry to authorities, pension funds sought permission to invest some assets offshore at a threshold of up to 25% to preserve value. Ncube now says this will soon be possible. Presently, pension funds in Zimbabwe are able to invest in United States dollar-denominated assets in the country. Such investments include, but are not limited to, equity investments on the Victoria Falls Stock Exchange and some private equity investments. To Mauritius now, where Prime Minister Pravind Jugnauth has announced price subsidies for an additional 7 basic consumer products. The subsidies, valued at approximately $12 million, start on July the 12th and will be in place for 6 months. The move by the government follows a surge in the price of consumer staples triggered by prolonged economic disruptions due to the pandemic. Our correspondent Liu Feifei has more from Port Louis.
Mauritius is recognized globally as a best practice model in the battle against COVID-19. However, the success, thanks to stringent lockdown measures and border closing, has come at an economic cost. While Mauritius enjoys a relatively modernized and diversified economy, tourism still accounts for some 30% of the GDP. And at the same time, the island nation is heavily dependent on imports for basic consumer staples. This double-edged sword of less foreign currency coming in and lots of it going out has put significant pressure on consumer wallets.
The economy locally has been hit more significantly than elsewhere in the world. Last year, GDP dropped by somewhat close to 15%, which obviously is quite a huge drop and much higher than what happened in the rest of the world. Because if we look at Europe or even the US, the contraction was limited and didn't exceed 10%.
Compounding this domestic contraction in the economy, costs of imports have skyrocketed while the Mauritian rupee has devalued, creating a perfect storm for people struggling to put food on the table for their families.
The subsidy will help the public to buy food for their daily needs. The price of food has gone up too high and the people, they couldn't afford to buy food anymore. But with these new subsidies and the lower prices, people can buy what they need again.
This new subsidy measure will bring prices for the 7 items down to what they were as of January 1st this year.
The government will allocate 12 million USD roughly for the next 6 months to support the subsidies and importers, which, if we look at it in terms of GDP, accounts for less than 1% of the current GDP, which is quite manageable at the end.
While some detractors believe the subsidy has come too late, others are concerned about the lack of government price monitoring and enforcement capabilities. But most Mauritians find the news a welcome relief.
The situation in Mauritius is that everyone is suffering in their own way because of the problems brought here by COVID-19. To help everyone now, the price decrease on food from the government is very good.
While the fallout from COVID-19 continues to pressurize the Mauritian economy, what we're seeing is the national government stepping in to protect those who are most vulnerable. And even though these new subsidies provide only temporary relief, the real goal is to vaccinate 60% of the population in time for the scheduled full border openings in October. When the tourists come back, economic recovery will be on the horizon. Liu Feifei, CGTN, Port Louis, Mauritius.
Tanzania has identified the Mkomazi National Park as a center for rhino tourism. The rhino sanctuary now hosts 196 African black rhinos. Numerous efforts to control poaching and enhanced breeding have seen the animal numbers rise from the brink of extinction. Here's CGTN's Wanja Mungai with that story.
The Mkomazi National Park in northern Tanzania is home to the endangered African black rhino. It is now recognized as the first black rhino sanctuary in East Africa. Previously, poaching had threatened to permanently deprive Tanzania of this majestic animal. But with continued efforts to save and multiply them, now the sanctuary is seen as an important facility for the tourism industry.
Historically, this park had many rhinos, but it reached a stage where all the rhinos almost perished. So we decided to start again, and usually to restart is not easy. Now we are seeing the efforts are paying off. I believe we will utilize the Conservancy fully to discover the attractions and also to be involved in conservation of the park.
The World Wildlife Fund says the population of the African black rhino has dramatically dropped in the 20th century. Poaching by European settlers between 1960 and 1995 is the main reason why the Big Five member has not been roaming the African jungle in the previous large numbers. Within that period, the WWF reports that African black rhino numbers dropped by 98%. With vigorous conservation efforts by African countries, the animal is slowly bouncing back from the brink of extinction. Presently, there are an estimated 5,600 black rhinos on the continent. Tanzania boasts of having 196 of them.
The presence of these rhinos is important, but the most important is to have services that will make tourists happy to come and see the rhino. We have to improve the services we provide to the visitors. The best service is a permanent advertisement. It is an advertisement that will bring many visitors and make them return, because tourism industry is a business sector.
The Mkomazi National Park is aiming to attract 5 million tourists and to make $2.6 billion by 2035. Wanja Mungai, CGTN.
More on Global Business Africa when we return.
This has taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in.
Business in Africa is high risk.
After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Ucheo Koronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
Let's now recap on the hour's top stories. At least 45 people have now died in the violence that has been engulfing parts of South Africa since the jailing of former President Jacob Zuma last week. Almost 800 people have been arrested in the arrest that began last Thursday and turned violent over the weekend. The military has now been deployed to help the overstretched police. President Cyril Ramaphosa has called it some of the worst violence witnessed in South Africa since the 1990s, before the end of apartheid. Authorities in the Nigerian commercial capital Lagos say the city faces a potential third wave of COVID-19 infections following a gradual rise in new cases there. The news comes after the Nigeria Center for Disease Control recently confirmed the country's first case of the Delta variant of the virus. In Tunisia, the Delta variant of coronavirus has caused a surge in cases and has increased hospitalizations in the country. Authorities say the country's health system has collapsed. Tunisian President Kais Saied has summoned medics and paramedics, including biomedical specialists who graduated in the last 3 days to perform national service. And that was a recap of our top stories. Well, we do have one more. The National Electoral Board of Ethiopia has declared Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's Prosperity Party the winner of the 6th general elections of the nation. The party won 410 out of the 436 seats of parliament. A new government is expected to be formed in September. Abiy is expected to continue with what he terms as homegrown economic reforms and pacifying parts of the country facing unrest, notably the Tigray region. Ethiopia's Prime Minister Ahmed pledges that the reforms will continue. And that was a recap of our top stories for the hour. The European Commission says that it has temporarily halted plans for a new digital tax following intense pressure from the United States and also after G20 finance ministers backed plans for a global minimum tax. Alongside those developments, EU foreign ministers got behind a massive infrastructure strategy to link Europe to the rest of the world. Reporting from Brussels, here's Tony Waterman.
U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen is in Brussels this week with one main goal: to derail the EU's new digital tax, which Washington believes could unfairly target Silicon Valley tech giants. And in a way, the U.S. got exactly what it wanted. The European Commission announced on Monday that it is shelving plans for the new levy on online sales, at least until the autumn. That is when G20 heads of state meet in Rome to potentially put the final touches on a new 15% global minimum corporate tax rate after the group's finance ministers endorsed the plan this past weekend. Now, Brussels was loath to admit that the postponement of its digital levy, which was meant to be unveiled next week, has anything to do with pressure from Washington, instead insisting that this is all about directing efforts towards ironing out the final details of the new global tax.
Successfully concluding this process will require a final effort, a final push from all parties, and the Commission is committed to focusing on that effort.
Well, as one proposal fell by the wayside, another was enthusiastically greenlit. EU foreign ministers on Monday agreed to launch a massive infrastructure plan that would span the world. They are calling it a globally connected Europe. And while there is no mention of China in the plan, it is widely seen as a response to Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative, which some in Europe are suspicious of.
There are many countries in Africa, in Latin America, but also in Europe that are realizing now that the Chinese commitment is also guided by their own interests and which are looking for alternatives. And we must now use this momentum to offer many countries an alternative.
China says BRI creates opportunities and good results for all countries and benefits the whole world. And on Monday, Luxembourg's foreign minister cautioned against making China an adversary, noting that German car makers sold more vehicles in China than in Germany. The EU already has partnerships with Japan and India on transport, energy, digital links to Asia, but this would turn attention to Africa and South America as well. The Commission has now until spring of 2022 to come up with a list of projects and financing schemes, and options could include things like deep sea digital cables, infrastructure connections to Africa, even financing renewable energy projects in climate vulnerable places like the Maldives. Tony Waterman, CGTN, Brussels.
China's state-owned enterprises showed record-breaking performance in the first half of 2021. That's according to State-Owned Asset Supervision and Administration Commission of the State Council. In the past 6 months, these firms realized over 17 trillion yuan in operating revenues. Net profit exceeded 1 trillion yuan for the first time ever at a 2-year average growth rate of over 20%. The regulator says a strong showing is thanks to the deepening government's 3-year action plan for SOE reform in China. To China's fresh trade data for the first half of 2021, authorities say trade growth remains strong and robust. CGTN Sui Huao takes a closer look at the numbers.
The overarching message from authorities today is that China's foreign trade is growing steadily. Now, this can be seen in how it has registered positive growth for 13 consecutive months. In the first half of 2021, the total volume hit 18 trillion RMB, up 27.1% year-on-year. Exports grew by more than 28%, while imports rose by nearly 26%. Now, trade with its top 3 trading partners, ASEAN, the EU, and the U.S., have all been growing. What is worth mentioning is that two-way trade between China and the U.S. grew at nearly 35% during these 6 months. China continues to export electromechanical products like computers and cell phones to the United States, while it imports agricultural goods from America. Now, this is significant because it shows both sides are implementing the Phase 1 trade deal and that despite their various challenges, trade ties between the world's 2 largest economies remain robust. On the European Union, we know the EU Parliament has halted a key bilateral investment deal with China, but trade links remain solid. Figures show two-way trade grew by 26% in the first 6 months, and currently the EU is China's second largest trading partner after the ASEAN. The spokesperson Li Kui-wen from General Administration of Customs said there were two factors behind the overall sound foreign trade. One is the domestic economy, and the other is global economic recovery. Earlier, the IMF has projected global growth at 6% this year, and this has boosted demand for Chinese exports. However, despite this healthy and sound momentum, when asked about the second half of 2021, the spokesperson was less than certain.
There are some uncertainties, especially in terms of how the pandemic affects trade. Meanwhile, sound growth in the second half of 2020 means growth for this year may see a slowdown.
China plans to increase foreign trade to over $5 trillion by 2025, an average annual increase of 2%. Given the uncertainty of COVID-19 pandemic, China is looking to further develop cross-border e-commerce and service trade to reach this goal. CGTN, Beijing.
Tokyo is under another state of emergency less than 2 weeks before the Olympics. Athletes are to compete in largely empty stadia. Spectators have been banned from most venues. Mayu Yoshida reports on the reactions in Tokyo.
Tokyo 2020 will likely be one of the quietest summer games ever. Organizers have decided to hold events in Tokyo without any spectators. A limited number of people, however, will be allowed at certain events held outside of the Tokyo area. For Olympic fans like Kazunori Takeshima, the decision is devastating. He spent $40,000 to purchase 100 tickets.
I'm angry I can't go to the venues to watch the games, but my biggest frustration is that the organizers waited until the last minute to make the decision.
Hiromi Matsuo is too young to remember the last time Tokyo hosted the Summer Olympics in 1964. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to witness the Olympics in her home country.
If it wasn't for the pandemic, everyone would have been looking forward to this Olympics, and it could have provided so much hope and dreams for children too. But given the current atmosphere, I feel so sorry for the athletes and organizers who spent years preparing.
The decision to hold the games spectator-less comes at a cost. No crowds mean no ticket sales, placing more of a financial burden on an already skyrocketing budget.
Athletes will be forced to compete under obstacles. The games shouldn't go ahead until fair games are guaranteed.
Public support for the games remains low according to recent polls. Anti-Olympic protests continue in the run-up to the opening ceremony.
We want to protest against the Olympics to the very end, and we want it to be cancelled.
Concerns over Tokyo 2020 becoming a super spreader event remain strong. Of course, residents in Tokyo say they had been looking forward to attending the games in their home country, but health and safety comes first. One thing for sure is that these Olympics will look and feel completely different from past editions. Mai Yoshida for CGTN, Tokyo.
The southern Chinese city of Guangzhou will launch a new command system to oversee high-tech industries such as artificial intelligence and semiconductors. The trade and manufacturing hub will name top city officials as supply chain chiefs to protect them from external shocks. Huang Fei reports on what the policy entails.
On board one of these electric cars are at least 1,400 microchips. The tiny devices are the brains behind the vehicle's every move, from engine control to infotainment and self-driving. Guangzhou Automobiles Ion, the third best-selling EV brand in China, says nailing down chip supplies hasn't been easy.
We used to think we could source everything around the world, but due to the China-US trade war, natural disasters, and the pandemic, many car companies have had to close factories or scale back production earlier this year. This is a stark reminder that we have a weak link.
Guangzhou's supply chain chief strategy aims to shore up 21 industries, including semiconductors, AI, and new energy vehicles.
This auto factory is an example of how several high-value supply chains have come together to make electric cars. Solar panels on the roof generate power for production. Intelligent robots work in teams to install windshields and seats.
And 5G-enabled chips give the cars autonomous driving capabilities. Any one of these technologies can be vulnerable to economic or geopolitical disruptions. And the job of a supply chain chief is to identify weak links and devise backup plans. Experts say the plans may involve dedicated funding to facilitate technological breakthroughs and handing out crucial raw materials to reduce costs.
Increasingly, our supply chains are becoming more regional. From manufacturing, logistics to consumption, the line is getting shorter. The goal is to limit our exposure to tariffs, exchange rates, and foreign sanctions. We also need to shift our focus from low-value industries to build a more high-tech and intelligent supply network.
But a sweeping industrial upgrade takes time. ION is expecting another challenging year, with certain microprocessors facing a shortfall of up to 75%. Meanwhile, surging costs for shipping and raw materials continue to eat away at business profits.
We still have to survive the next 3 to 5 years. We still have to work with foreign suppliers. Some trade brokers, both at home and abroad, are stockpiling or driving up costs. We hope governments can crack down on behaviors that are harming the industries.
The company is investing in dozens of domestic manufacturers to secure chips and batteries. It's calling on the government to give tax cuts and subsidies to empower the industries and develop a national standard for semiconductor manufacturing and testing. Huang Fei, CGTN, Guangzhou.
Let's now take another look at the markets. It's commodities now, which painted a rather bleak picture of investor sentiment today. Even cocoa, which often bucks negative sentiment, was down almost 0.8%. Gold made those modest gains of 0.4%, as investors likely begun retreating into safe haven territory again, following some of the sour news on the market today. We could see this change quite quickly, though, should U.S. company earnings come at the levels some analysts had forecast. Brent crude ticked slightly higher today, a combination of investors believing a demand will keep pumping in and also signs of possible tighter oil supply. Let's now take a short break and return. The story of an e-waste initiative tackling electronic waste in Kenya.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Syria,
Juba,
Johannesburg,
Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival, and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Well, as the world continues to generate more electronic waste, countries are grappling with the question of just how to safely dispose that waste. In 2019, the Global E-Waste Monitor found that Africa generated 2.9 million tons of waste electrical and electronic equipment. The continent, however, recycles less than 1% of its electronic waste. CGTN's Wilkes Anyawa spoke to a group seeking to tackle that problem.
There is never an idle moment in this corner of Ngara Market on the outskirts of Nairobi. Technicians are busy taking apart old electronic devices and building new ones from the old parts.
I've learned that you don't need to throw away things right away. Find a workman and see if it can be repaired. You can't always buy new devices.
Electronic waste management is an idea championed in this market by the organization Electronic Waste Initiative Kenya. Every day, thousands of devices are discarded from offices and homes. When an electronic appliance is faulty or has reached the end of its life, it's easy to simply discard it into the environment and purchase a new one. However, one of the ways in which electronic waste can be managed is by having it refurbished or dismantling it in order to prolong the life of another appliance.
Those ones that can be refurbished, we proceed and refurbish them. Then we resell them. And those that cannot, that are beyond repair, we have partners who do recycling.
Electronic waste, or e-waste, is one of the fastest growing waste streams in the world. According to the United Nations Global E-Waste Monitor 2020, Africa generated 2.9 million tons of electrical and electronic waste in 2019. It recycles less than 1% of that amount. The rest often ends up being mixed with ordinary waste in dump sites and landfills. Some elements found in e-waste can cause cancer.
The illegal disposal of these in communities or in rivers that actually result to not only contaminating this water that people drink that will inflict problems in their bodies, but more importantly, the fact that it also litters and destroys the environment.
Analysts believe part of the answer lies in regulating e-waste management through policy changes. Rwanda is one of only 13 countries in Africa that have passed national legislation on e-waste regulation.
They have set up a plan that can process 10,000 metric tons of e-waste a year. And this is mining at minerals worth $66 million each and every year.
As an incentive, EWIC pays collectors for electronic waste collected and brought to the center. Bit by bit, they are showing the rest of the country the way.
We have adopted a circular economy model whereby when you pick these things, you can be able to innovate around, and also you can be able to recover precious metals like gold, palladium, silver.
Managing e-waste, they believe, could be the key to not only safeguarding the planet, but to also help unlock future opportunities for many. Wilkes Anyawa, CGTN.
Egypt has moved to tame the use of three-wheeled vehicles known as tuk-tuks by imposing legislation on the owners. Tuk-tuk owners will now be required to either license the auto rickshaws or replace them with minivans. CGTN's Joy Kiruku Juma reports.
The tuk-tuk, a nuisance to some as they weave through traffic on Egypt's chaotic city streets. To others, they're a cheap way to get from A to B in a fraction of time. Now, the government wants to regulate the three-wheeled motorized rickshaws by introducing a national licensing system. The government is also urging drivers to convert to natural gas-powered minibuses.
This tuk-tuk is our life and our future. We don't care about licensing.
We don't care about a car worth millions. I am disabled and suffer from paralysis. I can go get a car, but it won't benefit me the way this small machine helps me. It feeds my children and feeds me.
The government says licensing tuk-tuks will help trace those responsible for accidents or crimes. It will also tame underage driving and provide drivers with insurance and a pension.
Yes, there are a lot of flaws. Children sometimes ride it. But everything has positives and negatives. The authorities previously told us to issue police license, so we issued them. That could be a solution. Or they could ask us to go register with the district and pay taxes every year. Maybe they could change the appearance of the tuk-tuk.
These licenses are granted to the owners of the tuk-tuk so that it is safe to drive on the street. Therefore, the citizen who uses the tuk-tuk will feel safe because he is riding in a vehicle that has become regulated and has a legal status, and its data is known.
Some drivers have welcomed the licensing plan. They are, however, opposed to trading in their tuk-tuks for minivans.
If they will license the tuk-tuks, then I agree. But the thing about a car, how will I pay the installments? What about the apartment rentals? I want one thing, this tuk-tuk. I'm willing to license and drive it. Everyone is pleased with the tuk-tuk. It is good, and the fare is only 5 Egyptian pounds. We take the customer everywhere. Even if the customer wants to go up the stairs, we help them carry their bags up the stairs, then help them come down, then we leave. But a minibus won't assist customers to their homes. The most they will do is let them come off at the beginning of the street.
Some residents have hailed the tuk-tuk as a blessing.
This gives us comfort when we are tired. Whenever I call him, he comes straight away and takes me wherever I want to go. If I take a car, I will have to wait for an hour or two by the time it gets here. But this is always here on the street. It's a mercy for people who are ailing, or for someone who has an errand to run, to make it to work on time, or to catch the minibus on time.
Officials estimate there may be as many as 4 million tuk-tuks in Egypt, which are either unlicensed or licensed under varying local rules. Joy Kirukijuma, CGTN.
And now for a final look at the markets with Forex trade. Even higher prices did not do much to boost Nigeria's Naira today, and that was higher oil prices. It was weaker against the dollar at 411.59. Kenya's shilling lost some ground today and is now at 108 to the greenback. South Africa's rand slumped even further due to that unrest in the country. It was down 1.4%. Bucking the trend yet again, Egypt's pound firmed ever so slightly against the dollar and is now trading at 15.69. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember that you can send your feedback to the contacts on the screen and follow us on digital media platforms. From me, Hannah Viviers, and the rest of the Global Business Africa team, thank you so much for watching. We'll see